Good morning everyone, welcome to the online program on entrepreneurship development. Topic for this session is critical thinking. An entrepreneur scared of critical thinking challenges. Held by Dr. Madhu Sharan, narrated by Dr. Soumya Sharan. We have all heard of the concept of survival of the fittest. This has been used universally whenever one succeeds and the others fail. For entrepreneurs, the biggest fear or question is, am I going to succeed? Now the question comes, why do only some succeed and not others? Why are only some classified under successful businessmen or women? Why do only some of the startup proposals are appreciated? And why people trust only certain individuals for the resolution of any problem? The answer here is in their way of thinking. Many a times in a business, a situation may be challenging, leading to a struggle. It is because the business has been mismanaged, they have not adapted to the newer and improving technologies, and in a few cases, the higher-ups were simply negligent. The situations mentioned above share a root cause, a lack of critical thinking. Most of us have ideas but do not pursue them because of the fear of failure. This fear can be overcome when you have thought critically about the various aspects related to it in advance. Therefore, critical thinking is imperative for and required to be a successful entrepreneur. What is critical thinking? According to the definition given by the Foundation for Critical Thinking website, critical thinking is the intellectually disciplined process of actively and skillfully conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, and/or evaluating information gathered from or generated by observation, experience, reflection, reasoning, or communication as a guide to belief and action. Now, this definition sounds a bit complex, but it isn't if you go step by step. It is a simple process involving understanding and channelizing the information in order to make better decisions and generally understanding things a bit better. Critical thinking is the opposite of regular everyday thinking. Most thinking happens automatically in day-to-day life. When you think critically, you deliberately employ the intellectual tools to reach more accurate conclusions than your brain automatically would. This is what critical thinking is. Critical thinking is a learned skill. The following three are key aspects for acquiring this skill. Number 1, question assumptions. Number 2, reason through logic. And number 3, diversify thought. Let's go over all these three one by one, shall we? Alright. Number 1, question assumptions. This approach is particularly helpful when the stakes are high. If you're in a discussion about long-term company strategy upon which years of effort and expense will be based, be sure to ask these basic questions about your assumptions. How do you know that the business will grow? What does the research say about your expectations about the future of the market? Or, another way to question your assumptions is to consider alternatives. You might ask, what if our clients change? What if our suppliers went out of business? These sort of questions help you gain fresh perspective that will help improve your thinking. Number 2, reason through logic. At your workplace or organization, pay close attention to the chain of logic constructed by a particular argument. Ask yourself, is the argument supported by evidence at every point? Do all the pieces of the evidence build on each other so as to produce a sound conclusion? Number 3, seek out diversity of thought and collaboration. If everyone around you thinks as you do, you become more rigid in your thinking and less likely to change your beliefs on the basis of new information. In fact, if you listen to people with differing views, you become less rigid and more adept to embracing changes. So diversity in thought is another important aspect to be taken care of. There are two broad approaches that will work to make better decisions. The first is creating a situation that will lead to better decisions in light of what we already know about human reasoning. Examine the decision in multiple times, places, and moods. Talk to more people and have more debates. And don't let bad decisions put your reputation at stake. The second is to absorb lots and lots of knowledge about the world and integrate it with your decision making. In other words, critical thinking comes from smart thinking. Critical thinking requires you to apply diverse intellectual tools to diverse information. From where does the information comes from, or the source of the information? It is through observation, experience, reflection, reasoning, and communication. The next step is how to think about the information you have. It can be done by conceptualizing, analyzing, synthesizing, and evaluating. All the above would lead to some action or decision. Thus, action or decision will now be the result of critical thinking. Why does critical thinking matter? It is good that most of our day-to-day thinking is not critical. Had it been for each and every action such as breathing, moving around, and eating, we wouldn't have any energy left for making important decisions. It's good that most of our thinking is subconscious. On the other hand, we would run into problems when our automatic thinking influences important decisions. In this situation, people may easily manipulate you, and your fundamental decision-making attitude can lead to disaster. This is why critical thinking is needed. So automatic thinking should be supported with critical thinking in daily life as and when required. Critical thinking doesn't happen with some abstract logic. It happens when you know enough about how the world works to rule out certain possibilities as being unlikely or impossible. Being able to think critically is an essential skill. You need to wade through what everyone is saying and pick out the truth from the nonsense. The advantages of critical thinking. It helps you make difficult decisions. As defining values help in making better decisions, the decision-making process helps to think critically. Critical thinking allows you to compare the pros and cons of your available options, showing that you have more options than you might have imagined. It saves you from being manipulated. When you evaluate information critically, especially information meant to sell something, you can avoid falling prey to unethical companies and people. It makes you more employable and therefore eligible for better pay. The best employees not only know how to solve existing problems, they also know how to come up with solutions to unforeseen mishaps. Critical thinking is the key ingredient to solving difficult, novel problems. Till now, we have seen what critical thinking is and why it is essential. And now, the how. The question remains, how can critical thinking be developed? The following 11 are the points one should follow. Number 1. Ask basic questions. Few basic questions to be asked when approaching any problem. What do you already know? How do you know that? What are you trying to prove, disprove, demonstrate, critique, etc.? And what are you overlooking? Some of the most breathtaking solutions to problems are astounding, not because of their complexity, but because of their elegant simplicity. Sometimes an explanation becomes so complex that the original question gets lost. To avoid this, continually go back to the basic questions you asked when you set out to solve the problem. Number 2. Question basic assumption. Some of the greatest innovators in human history were the ones who simply looked up for a moment and wondered, what if everyone's general assumptions were wrong? From Newton to Plato, questioning assumptions is where innovation happens. Now, you don't have to be an aspiring Einstein to benefit from questioning your assumptions. All your dreams can be a reality if you just question your assumptions and critically evaluate your beliefs about what's practical, appropriate, or possible. Number 3. Be aware of your mental processes. Human thought is amazing, but the speed and automation with which it happens can be a disadvantage when we are trying to think critically. A critical thinker is aware of the biases and personal prejudices and how they influence seemingly objective decisions and solutions. All of us have biases in our thinking. Becoming aware of them is what makes critical thinking possible. Number 4. Try reversing things. A great way to get unstuck on a hard problem is to try reversing things. Even if it turns out that the reverse isn't true, considering it can set you on the path to finding a solution. Number 5. Evaluate the existing evidence. When you're trying to solve a problem, it's always helpful to look at other works that have been done in the same area. There's no need to start solving a problem from scratch when someone has already laid the groundwork. It's important, however, to evaluate this information critically, or else you can easily reach the wrong conclusion. Ask the following questions of any evidence you encounter. Who gathered this evidence? How did they gather it, and why? Number 6. Remember to think for yourself. Don't get so involved in research and reading that you forget to think for yourself. Sometimes this can be your most powerful tool. Don't be overconfident, but recognize that thinking for yourself is essential to answering tough questions. Number 7. Understand that no one thinks critically 100% of the time. Critical thinking of any kind is never universal in any individual. Everyone is subject to episodes of undisciplined or irrational thought, by Michael Shriven and Richard Paul. You can't think critically all the time. Critical thinking is a tool that you should deploy when you need to make important decisions or solve difficult problems. However, you don't need to think critically about everything. And even in important matters, you will experience lapses in your reasoning. What matters is that you recognize these lapses and try to avoid them in the future. Number 8. Become a self-critic. The very first and most important step for developing critical thinking skills is becoming a critic of your own thoughts and actions. Without self-reflection, there can't be growth. When you can break down your own thoughts by asking yourself why you believe in something. When you do this, you need to clarify your thoughts by assessing this information objectively and finding a solid logic to what you believe, rather than just a muddled idea. Why do I believe this? Can I think of examples in my life when this was proved true or false? Am I attached to this idea emotionally? Why? When we self-reflect, we are able to observe how we respond to the situation in our minds and out loud. Another aspect of becoming a self-critic is acknowledging your strengths, weaknesses, personal preferences, and biases. When you know this information, you can understand why you approach certain situations from a specific perspective, and then you can step around that viewpoint because now you are aware of its presence. Number 9. Active listening. Thinking and listening are nearly impossible to do at the same time. To become a critical thinker, you need to be able to listen to others' ideas, arguments, and criticisms without thinking of your response or reaction while they are speaking. You can't properly absorb the information someone is trying to convey to you if you don't take the time to truly listen. Listening allows us to feel empathy. When we hear someone else's story, struggles, ideas, successes, and passions, and how they reach them. When we hear their perspective, we can take that information and analyze it. When we use active listening skills, we can fully understand what someone is trying to tell us because the conversation continues until all parties can reiterate what the other is trying to say. Number 10. Analyzing information. Analyzing information is paramount for critical thinking. No one thinks critically at all times. Sometimes our joy, anger, anger, sadness, or other emotions are too great. And other times we struggle to focus on the central issue at hand. To reach success, we need to analyze the information before us, whether it is information in our mind or being shared by others. We can break it down by assessing what is being said and ensuring that we can clearly understand what it is that needs to happen. Then, we can dissect and appraise all arguments, including our own, and think about how the decision would impact outsiders as well as the subordinates. When we step back and analyze an argument, it allows us to approach it from an objective viewpoint. Number 11. Develop foresight. Foresight is the ability to predict the future impact of a decision. It is a critical component for success in all aspects of your life. When you move somewhere, you plan ahead to see what the job outlook is like and the safety of a neighborhood. If you're moving a business, it is wise to examine the impact of that decision. Will it be too far for some of your talented employees to drive? Will you lose business because of the change? What will you gain? Every decision should be weighed carefully with consideration of how the choice affects subordinates and also your colleagues. Critical thinking requires the ability to reflect on one's own beliefs as well as someone else's ideas and then see the connections between those things. It requires the ability to actively listen to others, to assess, dissect, and appraise arguments, and to separate intense emotions from the topic at hand. Now, let's take a look at the 7 golden steps to improve critical thinking. Number 1. Don't take anything at face value. The first step in thinking critically is to learn to evaluate what you hear, what you read, and what you decide to do. So, rather than doing something because that's what you've always done or accepting what you've always heard as the truth, spend some time just thinking. What's the problem? What are the possible solutions? What are the pros and cons? Of course, you'll still have to decide what to believe and what to do, but if you really evaluate things, you're likely to make a better, more reasonable choice. Number 2, consider motive. Where information comes from is a key part of thinking critically about it. Everyone has a motive and a bias. Sometimes it's pretty obvious, other times it's a lot harder to detect. Knowing the source of information affects how you evaluate it and whether you decide to act on it. Number 3, do your research. All the information that gets thrown at us on a daily basis can be overwhelming, but if you decide to take matters into your own hands, it can also be a very powerful tool. If you have a problem to solve, a decision to make, or a perspective to evaluate, get onto Google and start reading about it. The more information you have, the better prepared you'll be to think things through and come up with a reasonable answer to your query. Number 4, ask questions. Never shy away from questions. You just need to know. And once you get into this habit, you not only learn more, but often discover whole new ways of thinking about things. In my opinion, those other perspectives can also help you get closer to thinking through a problem or uncovering what's what. Number 5, don't assume you're right. It is hard because being right feels awesome. It's an ego trip almost everyone aims to take at some time or another. But assuming you're right will often put you on the wrong track when it comes to thinking critically. Because if you don't take in other perspectives and points of view, think them over and compare them to your own, you really aren't doing much thinking at all, and certainly not the critical kind. Number 6, break it down. Being able to see the big picture is often touted as a great quality, but being able to see that picture for all its components is even better. After all, most problems are too big to solve all at once, but they can be broken down into smaller components. The smaller the parts, the easier it will be to evaluate them individually and arrive at a solution. This is essentially what scientists do before they can figure out how a bigger system works, such as our bodies or an ecosystem. They have to understand all parts of that system, how they work, and how they relate to each other. Lastly, number 7, keep it simple. This means that finding the simplest solution that fits all facts. This is what you would call the most obvious explanation and the one that should be preferred, at least until it's proven wrong. So, let's conclude. Remember, learning to think is a lifelong journey and there's always more to learn. You learn how to set realistic goals, handle failure without giving up, and get going on the habits you want in your life. While luck plays a role, sometimes small, sometimes large, in a company's success, the most important business victories are achieved through thinking smart and critically. Critical thinking isn't easy. It involves letting go of what we want to believe and embracing a whole bunch of new information. It's uncomfortable, but it's also interesting. And when you do your research and finally lay out what you believe to be the facts, you'll probably be surprised by what you uncover. It might not be what you were expecting, but chances are it'll be closer to the truth. The downside to this is that critical thinking can't be picked up by taking a few credits in college. It means you need to be learning constantly in order to make intelligent decisions. The upside is that it also means smarter decisions are made possible. Far from just being an abstract identity you either have or you don't, critical thinking is part of the process of knowing things to begin with, and that you can get better at it by learning more throughout your life. Hoping this session was informative as well as useful. Thank you and have a good day.